Yeah, live on
Thank you.
YouTube.
Good morning, members. John Colpin can't be with us this morning, so I'm chairing this morning's meeting of Schools Forum. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely in line with revised guidance received from the Department for Education. Minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the meeting page of the Council website. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the forum who have video cameras to keep their video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted except when I invite you to speak. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the same way. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function on the right-hand side of their screen. You can access the raised hand function by clicking on the attendees icon at the bottom of the screen. This will then show the attendees on the right-hand side of your screen. The blue hand function can be found at the bottom of the attendee list. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the officer to respond. I would ask for your patience if we run into technical problems, and should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such a time as it can be reconvened. Members, we'll begin the meeting with a roll call to establish who is present, and I will now pass over to Tamar Oviatt-Ham in Democratic Services.
Okay, so Simon Bainbridge.
Morning, yes, present.
Adrian Ball.
Yeah, present.
Liz Bassett.
Present.
Christopher Bennett. Yeah, Christopher Bennett.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, yeah, it's okay. I did think you were there. Susanna Cannell.
Present.
Sasha Howard.
Good morning, present.
Joan Hardwick.
Joanne Hardwick. Yeah, good morning.
Joanne, sorry.
It's okay.
Ryan Kelsall. No. John King. John
Yes,
King.
present. Yes, yes, thank you.
I can see John. Leah Miller.
Good morning.
Do we have Alex Pearson? Haven't seen Alex Pearson. No. Patsy Perez.
I'm here, present, thank you.
Richard Spencer.
Morning, colleagues, present.
Paul Strafford.
Present.
Yeah. Guy Underwood.
Good morning, present.
Councillor Claire Daunton. No. John Devine.
Present.
Councillor Bryony Goodliffe.
Present.
Andrew Reid.
Sorry, good morning, present.
Councillor Simone Taylor.
Good morning, present.
And Rob Turner. No, I don't think we've got Rob. So I think that's everybody. Is there anybody else that I haven't mentioned? No? I think that's everybody. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Would the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies for absence?
Yes, so we've received apologies from Claire Palmer, Deborah Parfitch, Joan McCrossan, Jeremy Lloyd and John Culkin.
Thank you.
Oh, Alex Pearson's just joined us.
Thank you. I would like to welcome Councillors Bryony Goodliffe, Claire Daunton and Simone Taylor, who were appointed as observers for the Schools Forum by the Children and Young People Committee at its first meeting following the local elections in May. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest?
Oh, could I just say that I have a member of my family that work within one of the academies within Cambridgeshire. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you, Simone. Right, moving on to item 2 on the agenda, the minutes from the 15th of January, from the meeting of the 15th of January 2021. To agree the minutes for accuracy, I shall go through the minutes page by page. Please raise your blue hand if you wish to raise a point of accuracy only.
How about you? Did you
Page 1.
Yeah.
Can I ask Alex, sorry, can I ask Alex to turn off his microphone?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I realise that. Page 2 of the minutes. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. So no comments. Can we agree the minutes is a correct record? Thank you. An updated action log was included in the published papers for this meeting. John, do you have any further updates to add since publication?
No, I think the actions contained within the report tie into the later update I'm going to give on the high needs block, because it incorporates the approach to the council now with the new administration to ministers, but equally we obviously briefed you on the high needs block situation. And it's our intention to bring those reports back in the autumn, along with the recovery update and the transformation work that we're doing. So I'll pick that up a bit later on.
Thank you, John. Have any members got any questions on the action log? Would they use the raised hand function? No, no members have indicated they wish to speak. So we will take the action log as noted. So item 4 on the agenda, review of membership and proportionality 2021. Can I please ask Tamar Oviatt-Ham to introduce this report?
Yes, thank you, Paul. Just a very brief introduction to the report. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a quick look at it. It's just the report outlines the proportionality review for this year and the current figures. Based on the current figures, there are no further changes to proportionality. You'll see that we've still got the vacancies to fill, and they'll, I know that John and the chair will be looking at that and going forwards over the autumn term. So were there any questions about proportionality and membership? Did anyone have any questions? John, did you want to say anything?
No, just to update that the process around academy appointments has been through the CEO forum, and we will be looking to append that change to the constitution of forum, and obviously seek any gaps in membership in the coming weeks. And I think that's Andrew's nodding as the chair of the CEO's forum that's now taken place. So I hope by the next meeting we will have a full complement of membership of forum.
Thank you very much. So Schools Forum is requested to note the reports and no vote is required. So moving on to item 5 for the agenda, the schools balances and DS.
Sorry to interrupt. I think there's a hand up. John, I think you had your hand up. Sorry.
Sorry, was there?
Yes, I did. Sorry, it's just a correction, really. I'm listed on there as representing Sir Harry Smith Community College, and I'm actually representing the Spire Learning Trust. So just to note that, Tamar, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, apologies for that.
Sorry, John. Sorry for not noticing. Right, moving on to item 5 of the agenda, schools balances and DSG financial health, July 2021. Can I ask John Lewis and Martin Wade to introduce the report?
Yeah, do you want me to go ahead, John?
Yeah, please. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so this is the annual report we present to Schools Forum, which just gives a kind of a summary of the year-end position for balances, revenue balances held by maintained schools, the overall DSG position, and then also following requests over the previous couple of years, we've also now accumulated some of the academy balances, which we'll also publish on the DFE website as well, just for comparative purposes. So, I mean, I think most of the report is quite self-explanatory, but I'll just pick out a few of the key areas. So, the table in 2.1 at the start of the report shows how maintained balances, cumulative maintained balances held by schools have changed between financial years. And as you can see in the primary sector, the balances have increased by £3.6 million. This is the revenue balances between the end of March 2020 and March 2021. As you'll see later on in the report, there's some kind of the reasons why this has occurred, but primarily it's due to schools not being able to spend some of the funds that they have during the obviously the ongoing pandemic. The tables in subsequent sections 2.4 and 2.5 show the levels of the balances held by schools. And as you can see, there's quite a range of balances held from obviously some schools who ended the year with slight deficits up to those who are holding significant balances, in excess of £400,000 in terms of those overall numbers. Section 3, this is something we've discussed previously around the maintained schools balance clawback mechanism. Now, if you remember previously, we had a clawback mechanism in place, which was agreed and approved by Schools Forum on an annual basis. The DFE a few years ago kind of relaxed the requirement to have this as a part of the ongoing process around balances. Now, again, previously we have spoke about bringing this back. In terms of putting a more rigorous process in place in terms of working with those schools who have significant high levels of balances. Again, we discussed this in the similar paper at last year's forum, but obviously at the time, this was just as we were coming into the pandemic, and it was agreed that we'd kind of bring it back to a later meeting to discuss in a little bit more detail. So it might be worth taking some views from colleagues as to whether actually we do want to consider bringing this back in and looking at it in a little bit more detail as to how we might do that going forward. If we look at section 4, just mentions that actually we've had a reduced number of schools who ended the year with a revenue deficit. At the end of 1920, there were 10 schools. This year there are only 5. That said, however, we are seeing a growing number of schools at the kind of the lower end of balances who are having to use a significant amount of those balances to balance their revenue position in year. We're also seeing a number of schools who are finding having cash flow issues in school in year as well. So on a month-to-month basis, some schools are having greater issues kind of managing that cash flow in year when they're paying significant invoices or paying payroll. So we are working with those schools where we're seeing that to kind of monitor that more closely, and do intend to do a little bit of a training session for those schools on the best ways to manage cash flow during the year as well going forward. Section 5 talks about the school's financial value standards. Again, this only applies to maintained schools, and they're required to submit their SFES on an annual basis, and then in turn the local authority then submit a return to the DFE. As at the revised deadline of the 28th of May, 113 of the maintained schools had submitted their returns. Subsequent to that, we have received a further 15, and at the time I wrote this report a couple of weeks ago, leaving 3 outstanding. I've not been in the office the last couple of weeks, so I can check with colleagues when I'm in next week to see what the latest position is on that. I think the key thing I'd say about this is that obviously I know this year has been a very different year in terms of pressures on schools, but we are noticing schools are leaving this later and later in the year to complete. So it's just a bit of a reminder that actually this return can be made at any time during the financial year. So just to encourage schools where possible to try and start this process and submit quicker, so that it's not something they're having to do right at the end of the financial year to meet the deadlines. As I've said here, once we know what the DfE deadlines are for next year, probably we'll just send something out to schools and put a kind of a local deadline a little bit earlier, just to encourage schools to complete and submit on an earlier basis. Section 6, as I mentioned earlier, we now also have taken a cut of data from the academy accounts returns, which the DfE publish on an annual basis as well. This is information that gives the latest revenue balances for academies up until the end of the previous academic year. And again, as with the maintained balances, Appendix A and Appendix B show the kind of the school level detail of that. What I would say is that this information is taken directly from the published information, and obviously we therefore haven't verified it. And likewise, we are seeing a growing number of academy trusts reporting balances at the consolidated level. So therefore, for some schools, there might not be balances at individual school level. Obviously, following increasing scrutiny around the levels of balances, we did send out a questionnaire for schools to complete, both maintained and academies. When the survey closed at the end of June, we had a total of 59 submitted responses, although I did note that a further 91 partial responses had been started but not actually submitted. As you can see, the split of responses was obviously 36 from maintained schools and 23 from academies or academy trusts. And you can see in the following section 7.3 to 7.4 and 7.5 that the rationale and reasons that schools had put forward as to either why their balances had increased, what they were holding those balances for, and what those intended use of those balances were going forward. I think, as we said previously, we do expect there could be further scrutiny from this from the DfE as the balances are continuing to increase. Interestingly, a regional event I was at a couple of weeks ago. This is again a growing issue across the region, where maintained balances are continuing to increase year on year across a number of areas as well. Section 8, just the DSG position. We've obviously mentioned this before in terms of the overall deficit that we're now holding on the dedicated schools grant. So at the end of 1920, we held a £16.6 million deficit following the in-year overspends on the high needs block, offset by some areas of underspend elsewhere. We now have a cumulative DSG carry forward of £26.4 million in terms of what that is. The table on at the top of page 30 just kind of gives a little bit more detail of those, the block breakdowns. So we can see we spent 12.5 million in year over budget on high needs block, and as I say, that was offset by some underspends elsewhere. As we've mentioned previously, as John will probably mention, we talk about high needs block. Obviously, we are working with the DfE at the moment to kind of look at the recovery plan around this, and we'll need to submit some information to the DfE. Interestingly, again, at the regional event I was at, the DfE made it clear that they actually don't hold, as it stands at the moment, a kind of a definitive list of what these balances are for all local authorities. So there's been a number of regional surveys and national surveys which have been undertaken. One of which you can see some of the results that I've kind of published shown at 8.6. So 32 of the 39 responding LAs are reporting a DSG deficit to the end of last year, with all but 6 showing a worsening position. And that graph kind of on in 8.6 kind of shows where we sit within that current kind of list of those that are submitted. Bear in mind, however, there are 151 local authorities in total. Kind of the information that we picked up from discussions with the DfE is that although our cumulative deficit is high, we have actually slipped down the list in terms of the kind of the cumulative level of deficit that actually is compared to some other local authorities. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get a more comprehensive list of the cumulative position of all other LAs that we'll be able to share with Forum at a later date. That's what I was going to say. So if there's any comments, observations, I'm happy to take any queries or questions.
Yep. So any members who want to ask questions, if you want to raise your hand and unmute your microphone.
I think I did. Could I ask a question?
Yes,
Yep.
Claire.
Yeah, okay. It's Councillor Daunton here, Claire Daunton. I'm one of the new county councillors, so this might be a very naive question, but I'll jump in. On Appendix A, there's some a whole range of areas or schools that are in deficit. I know it's a complex picture, but just give us an idea of how a school which is doing really well in 1819 can then go into such a significant deficit. Just give us a picture as a new person on the committee.
Okay, so I think these are very ad hoc, depending on the school. So the principal driver, as I would see it, by why there's a change is around pupil numbers. Where there are less children, it's an activity, or it's a numbers-driven funding arrangement nationally. So if a school has a falling roll, there's less money. The cost base stays the same unless it's changed. And obviously, what schools are doing is looking at all the reserves they got and making choices about: do they alter their structures? Do they work differently? And do they, make changes that save budgets? And obviously, our role is to oversee that, make sure that's happening, and plans are in place. So if they do go into deficit, and some schools have temporary deficits where they have pupil dips which go up, and we've given schools demography forecast to show them what it could be. But it's a very ad hoc arrangement, and I think the other factor is that Cambridgeshire is very lowly funded. We shouldn't hide behind the fact that our rate of funding is incredibly low. But if there's a full range in there, and there's a full range of context, it's really hard to put it down to one issue or not.
Thank you, Jonathan. So yeah, we discussed this, didn't we, at the Children and Young People's Committee, that we have to do something about the very low level of funding, and we need to put pressure to get that changed. But I also just wonder whether there will be some amalgamation of schools because of, and over what period, what leeway do you give the schools if they do go into deficit or come close to deficit? Over how many years will you allow that to happen before there will be forced mergers?
Well, merger is not something we're considering for any schools at the moment, to be really clear on that. It's a tool that could be there to save money and protect schools going forward. We have an annual process whereby schools submit their budgets, 3-year plans. We look at those, we challenge how appropriate they are or not. If they go over a certain threshold, we have to license a deficit, and we need to have an agreed plan in place. But ultimately, we're looking for schools to get back into surplus in a year. If it's not possible in a year, we will look at what steps they're making, and we will allow further time to make that happen. It does vary on an ad hoc basis, and it will also vary on the context of the school and the issue that's driven them into deficit. So, but just to reassure you, every single one of those schools that has a deficit, we know we're working with them, and appropriate steps are taking place, and we think there are robust plans to deliver on that.
And we can be confident that there's sufficient training in place for school managers in terms of budgetary training and management.
Yeah, absolutely. The support is there if the school needs it. I don't see these deficits being as a result of management failure or the way the school's running. It's a context around the school, it's national funding, and obviously changes that are going on elsewhere. Inflationary cost pressures are also another issue that we have seen.
Yes, okay, and obviously inflationary cost pressures, we might be coming up against a huge issue there in the near future in terms of inflation. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other members got any questions to Martin or John? No, thank you very much.
Guys, just come on.
We've got
sorry.
Guy put his hand up. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, it was late. I was struggling to find buttons. Is it the case that on some of the schools they're also kind of heavily involved in teaching? They're like a teaching school, so therefore that revenue has dropped down over the last 18 months. I just wonder whether John's got a view on that. I suspect that could be the case.
I think Martin will correct me. We withdraw from these balance some of the community activities that we see at the external activities, so it wouldn't have a huge impact. But some of the costs in schools are sustained through recharges from those arrangements, so there likely be a knock-on impact of that in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, just on similar theme, I mean, you can see a lot of the nursery school budgets and those schools who have nursery provision, that's their areas where that is obviously reduced because of the impact of COVID. So there's a number of those where there's external funding has significantly impacted on there. Just the other area, just another area of where there is particular pressure on schools, and this is obviously something we're looking at separately, is around small schools as well. So obviously finding that, as we said previously, the national funding formula doesn't currently really adequately support small schools, and there's a growing number of those small schools who are having to use their balances year on year to maintain their structure in the light of either falling numbers or just very low numbers overall, which isn't providing the level of funding that they need to operate the school. So again, that's another particular challenge for that group of schools.
Okay, anybody else? Any more questions arising on that report? Not that I can see. Thank you very much.
We've got Andrew. Sorry, Paul. Andrew's put his hand up.
Well, I can't see, but it's knocking me off my screen.
Thank you, Paul. I think there was also Guy as well.
Guy's done his question.
Guy was just done. I wonder if he'd come back. Okay, just a quick question, Martin, and it relates to the that which you've just said, and thank you for the detail. There's a significant difference, is there not, between the in-year position of schools and the structural position of schools? So if we were to take these figures and project them out over a 5-year period, I think it would be true to say that we would be quite concerned in relation to the extent to which a significant number of primaries are indeed using their ongoing revenue balance to supplement an in-year position, which is a deficit position. I just wondered if you could give us an indicative percentage of the number of schools which over the next 3 to 5 year period will need to reorganise staffing as a consequence of driving down the biggest cost, which is obviously people.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I can give a kind of put a percentage on it, but I would say if you look at kind of the base figures, it would be quite a reasonable proportion, depending on what their pupil numbers are looking like. That said, however, we have seen it over the last 3 to 5 years where a number of schools have in their budget plans said they are going to use a significant amount of their reserves and then don't end up having to do that. So for every few schools that say they will, you have those. So it is quite a mixed picture. And I think, as John says earlier, it's very much down to their individual circumstances. So one of the things we are looking at specifically is where schools have got forecast falling roles. We know that over the next 3 to 5 years, we know those are the schools that are most likely to be hit by the changes in funding, and therefore are most likely going to have to restructure or look at how they're utilising their overall resources. And Andrew, we've done the work with small schools, and we know if you kind of just look at their pure numbers looking forward over the next 5 years, it is not a pretty picture in terms of where they're potentially going to end up. But with all of these, it is very much on an individual basis. And I like to say that in 99% of cases, schools are very reactive, and we never get to that level because they take appropriate management action before we get to that stage. There's always going to be some schools where, for whatever reason, they're not able to do that, or actually the sudden drop in numbers is so extreme that it does give them some significant financial issues going forward.
Thank you.
Any more questions? No. Thank you. Schools Forum are asked to comment on the contents of the report, so no vote is required. So moving on to item 6 on the agenda, the high needs update. Can I ask John Lewis to give a verbal update?
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to change the order of what I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk about the DSG position because I think it will then lead into the high needs block. So if you're not aware, the government launched a consultation last week around the future of the dedicated schools grant, or as they describe it, fair funding, which I find quite ironic. But they've launched that consultation with a view that a response would be coming back in September. It's not a straightforward paper. And we will send it around to forum members. If you haven't seen it, it has come out on the DFE correspondence, because it describes the government's view on moving to a hard funding formula. So, i.e. funding schools nationally, as opposed to the arrangement we now have where we fund locally with national direction. The paper itself sort of runs through the different factors that will need to be considered, some of the complexities that we've always seen as a barrier to having a national hard formula. It doesn't give answers in all places, so it describes some of the growth arrangements. It's not clear on how local issues influence the national growth arrangements. It talks about SEND funding, who is responsible for the deficit, what would happen if you transferred funding when there's a national formula. There's quite a lot of detail that, to be fair, we haven't really dug into yet, and it's our intention that we will do that and refer to you. It does, however, cover the timescales, and again, I was expecting a more prompt move to a national formula. We've been sort of working on this now since 2017-18, and the current proposal doesn't look like government are proposing that happens until 24-25 financial year. So, up until that point, the existing arrangements will stay in place. One of the things it does say, though, that they will start to force local authorities or the schools forum to move towards using the national formula factors. To be reassured, we're pretty much there already. We've fallen into line. There are some elements of what we do that aren't, and we will have to look at what that means, but it's almost a tapering approach that we will have to go through to move towards that going forward. And the other thing it does suggest is this now time to harmonise when schools receive their funding? Is it an academic year or a financial year? So we are expecting some changes to come through with that going forward. It does, however, lay out the role of Schools Forum. It suggests that even beyond, and when we have a national hard formula, there is still a role for Schools Forum to play. So you're not getting away that lightly. It will continue in terms of their role. Not quite sure how that's going to work. But again, devil's in the detail in the paper going forward. So it's a big process we're going through. I'm slightly concerned the consultation is ending in September, given launching in July and then running it across the autumn. We will prepare a local authority response to that. I think the intention is that we get that out into the school sector in early September with some explanation of what the changes mean, and then if different groups wish to respond to that consultation, that's within their gift. There are elements of academy funding included, things like pooling funding for maths are included as part of that consultation, but we will certainly be making a response on behalf of the local authority, and we'll consider whether Forum may put a response into that as well. But I think it's really important schools engage, but I think we probably need to explain the implications of it on Cambridgeshire for you. And at the moment, we're just working through that. And my particular worry is around high needs block and the interaction with the hard formula as we move forward. So thank you, Andrew. You put the link out in there. We will send, make sure with the minutes that we send round a copy of the consultation as well. In terms of the high needs block situation, you've heard from Martin where we are. Obviously, we briefed this group about the current situation. We were due to brief head teachers in July, but our broadband network let us down, so we were unable to hold that event. We are running that event now on the 15th of September, and notification will be going out to schools imminently around that briefing. We've moved forward a long way with some of the discussions we had with you last time, so we now have work streams identified. We have a plan in place. We are looking at resourcing to bring that forward. And that is very much focused now, not around cuts and changes. It's around getting services in the right place to support children early and being proactive. I think we've accepted, the situation we have in is that we are not going to repay this deficit. And actually our focus should be on getting the right support, which may lead to savings in time, but it has to be the right support where it's needed in the system. We have a new joint administration for the council. I'm very pleased to see that the colleagues have joined us today. We are considering now what are the next steps the council will be making in terms of representation through that process. So again, in the autumn, we will talk to you and talk to the heads about how best we think to approach that going forward. Martin's already mentioned we will be submitting our recovery plan or our approach to the deficit at the end of July, hopefully. It may be slightly into August, and again we'll share that with Schools Forum. I am still thinking that the process needs to be that we go for a safety valve funding, which is the government write-off that they've done of other local authorities in similar context. And obviously we will seek your support with how best to do that. But I think there's a stage we need to go through in terms of engaging through the political arrangements, how best to take that forward. And it's our intention to bring that back to you in the autumn. So that's the position we're in at the moment. Happy to take any questions on either the high needs block or the reforms of funding. Martin, I think you want to come in first though.
John, can I just add a couple of other little things that I've picked up from the kind of regional events as well? You obviously mentioned about the consultation for looking at the future hardening of the funding formula going forward. I think what we can say for next year's funding formula, the expectation is there's going to be very little changes to what's actually implemented. The only consultations that they've done recently is obviously around sparsity funding, and I'm not sure if that response has come out yet, and likewise with business rates, but they're the only two things we're actually expecting to change for the funding formula for next year. So you should see very little change in terms of how it actually operates going forward. In terms of the safety valve funding, again, I don't know if this has been published, but the DfE did say that they're going to publish further details of what's actually been agreed with the local authorities who've had the safety valve funding already, and some areas of best practice as well. Again, I didn't give any timescales when they mentioned it. So again, from our perspective, it will be very interesting, because as we picked up, you know, there doesn't seem to be a set process for qualifying for the safety valve funding at the moment. So it's really interesting to know what they're actually doing and how they're actually working with these other local authorities who are struggling with similar deficits.
And just to say, if you haven't engaged with the sparsity consultation, it's worth having another look at it. It will bring significant additional funding to Cambridgeshire schools and will address some of those issues. We're happy to give you the sort of modelled figures based on this year and the winners through that arrangements, but it's quite significant for Cambridgeshire. So we're kind of hopeful that they see that one through. But it's only a small number of schools. I think it's about 20, I think, from memory, 30 schools that will be impacted by it. And just to say, it's to do with the distance to the next nearest school for pupils that's changed, or they're proposing to change instead of as the crow flies, it's as the road route is, and that makes a difference to some of our schools.
Okay, any more questions? Andrew, got a question.
Sorry to ask again. Having informally spoken to a couple of the local authorities who have drawn down the safety fund route, it seems that there are some pretty punitive caveats that come with the money, principally obviously around restructuring in order to be perceived to be living much more within our means. Do we have any early indication of how that might affect us if we are going down the route of holding out? And I respect the trying to preserve minimise the impact on the most vulnerable groups, but I'm just wondering if at the end of this there is an equally impactful consequence because of the control that the central government would have over us in the context of delivering that funding.
Okay, having looked at them, the measures are, and we've only got the headlines, admittedly, they're variable from some quite draconian measures around restricting this and that, or go to the other end where it's an investment in this, and this is what we're expecting you to do. So it does range fully. You know, the consistent dialogue I've had with the DfE is, tell me what I'm doing wrong and tell me where I should be doing something different. And so far, the only thing they've pulled out with us is that your post-16 spend is too high. Yes, I acknowledge that. Yes, we need to work on that transition, that work into communities. When you see our plan, you've seen the draft, the plan in there, that focus on that is definitely there. So I'd be really interested to see if they come and say we've got to change something, because I've asked them that repeatedly and not got an answer. So it'd be interesting to see. But I think we'd go into it with our eyes open. I think it is a process whereby they offer, and you say, yes, I'll accept that with those terms. And obviously that would be the local debate we've had with you about what that meant if we were asked or invited to apply for it.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Any more questions from members? No, I can't see any. Thank you, John. So moving on to item 6 on the agenda, the forward action plan, the agenda plan. Tamar, please can I check if there are any additions to the forward plan?
No additions, no.
Thank you. Would any members of the forum wishing to ask a question or make a comment about the plan, please use the raised hand function. Oh, sorry, Claire Daunton.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I was looking at the budget setting. Do we have any briefing, any sort of guidance before we get into the budget setting? A briefing on budget setting?
Yeah, we obviously we don't know. They haven't given us any details about what the budget's looking like yet for 22-23. When that comes through, papers will come through here, and the CYP committee lays out the allocation, what we've got, the process, and we'll make sure that forum members understand their role and responsibility, and there is training planned for the CYP committee on their role with the budget setting process.
Yeah. Okay, I think that would be really very helpful, where we could have some sort of really good interactive training and be asking questions, and that even the silliest question, I think it would be really helpful so that we can do the budget setting with confidence.
We will bring finance to life, don't worry.
Yeah, thank you. Especially in the light of what you've just been talking about, this new formula.
Well, that won't necessarily be an issue for next year. So, but we will go through. So the other thing we do and we do every year is we do a consultation exercise for schools, and again we will go through with everyone. That's open to anyone that wants to come along to it. Run through the changes, the approaches, what it means for Cambridgeshire, and the implications before any decisions are made through that process.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else got any question about the forward plan?
Just the dog.
Yeah, sorry, that's mine. I apologise. That's thank you very much. So we've got meetings. I've got here. We've got virtual meeting. Well, are we going to have virtual meetings? Do we know whether we're going to be virtual meetings or physical meetings in Alconbury come September?
So just to say, the conversations we're having, and we do need to follow through, and Tamar may update on this, is that when we do the big budget meeting as we see it in November, when we start to make the big decisions, we'll intend on doing that in person. The rest of the meetings we would look to continue to do virtually throughout the year. There is provision in the Schools Forum regulations that you can have all your meetings virtually if you choose to. We felt the strength and dialogue of meeting together for that more technical side, where you may want to go into your groups and have a discussion about the proposals, would be valuable. So we're looking to see where we are with booking the provision at Alconbury when that's
I'm sure that we will be able to use the multifunctional room, and also we could have a hybrid meeting as well if needs be. If people are unable to attend in person, we would be able to have a hybrid meeting in that room. So I'm fairly confident that we will be able to use that.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Tamar. Well, thank you very much. That concludes the business of the meeting. Therefore, can I thank you all for your attendance, and also for any people watching this meeting. And I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a nice summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.